this morning, and I got it. It's great to be here. I want to just begin with a little bit of transparency. I have been struggling with a sinus infection for the last 4 weeks. And so this is going to be the longest I've talked during the 4 weeks. So I'm a little bit concerned about my voice. So I will be stopping to drink water occasionally. And I might even need to put a cough drop or a hard candy in my mouth, even though it's going to be difficult to talk while I'm doing that. It's also early in the morning for me and probably for most of us since we lost that extra hour last night. I also just wanted to share, some of you I may have had the chance to meet many years ago. I visited your congregation in Houghton. I believe it was 6 years ago. It was the summer before my mom made her transition. And I had a beautiful trip up in the Upper Peninsula. I've lived in Detroit my whole life. I hadn't visited the Upper Peninsula since I was a child. And I had this joyful visit where I went up and visited all 3 of our UU congregations in about 10 days. It was a very quick journey from congregation to congregation. And I got home and my mom was very ill. And I wasn't able to follow up with people and the connections that I made in the way that I'd hoped to. And I wanted to apologize for that. It was a very kind couple who invited me into their home that evening when I realized that I wouldn't be able to just check into a hotel like I could in a metropolitan area like Detroit, and made sure that I had meals while I was in town. I just wanted to extend appreciation for that. I also wanted to thank Horst, a member of our MUUSJN board and a member of our Environmental Justice Task Force. And I've really enjoyed getting to know you, Horst, through those meetings, and your congregation is lucky to have you. I appreciate that you started with a land acknowledgement, and that's something that I like to do as well. And since I am on a different land than you, literally right now, I will share this. I am on stolen, occupied land, colonists named Livonia. The land originally was inhabited by people from the Fox, Peoria, Anishinaabe, Potawatomi, Mississauga tribes. Many of the native people were murdered by colonists who also raped their women while they stole their children, land, and belongings. However, many of their descendants of those tribes are still here caring for the land and water. I give reverence to the indigenous ancestors who nurtured this land and all the life that once inhabited the sacred ground and the waters here. I give gratitude to those members of tribal communities today who continue to tell the stories and honor the land and waters in Michigan and around the world. I see a future as the past I imagine, with an abundance of healthy land and growing things, animals, fish, waterways, and air. If we listen to the voices of the ancestors and those closest to these lands now, we can learn how to dwell here in a respectful and lasting way. Relationship with the earth is something the colonists didn't seem to honor or realize was necessary for the future of their descendants. It is past time to return this stolen land to the indigenous descendants who still understand and practice those relationships. I want to invite you all to take a deep breath. Feel your feet on the ground and your back against your chair. Look to the sides and behind you. You are safe, grounded, and supported. You are present and part of this loving community. I'm thankful for the opportunity to be with you this morning. I'd like to start by learning more about you through this opening reading, adapted from The Heart of Our Faith by Monica Jacobson Tennyson. During the reading, I'd like to invite you to participate with this fun tool I've discovered. Have any of you used Mentimeter to create a word cloud before?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So this is going to be fun and easy for some of you, and hopefully fun, even though it might be a little challenging and a stretch to do something new. And of course, if it's too much, then you can just watch and it'll still be fun to participate by watching, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put this link in the chat box, and I'm going to invite you to go to this website and then type in this 8-number code. And what we're going to do together is create a word web. I'm going to read this poem, and as I'm reading, I want you to respond with words that come to mind for you. So let's start by seeing how people can access this website and how you feel about it. So I'll give you a couple minutes. If you just go into the chat box and click on that link, or go to this website, www.menti.com. And then when you're there, it'll ask you for a code, and that'll take you directly to the box that I'm working in, 2869-5795. And if people are there, if you could somehow let me know, wave at me, or raise a hand, or yay, Eleanor. Eleanor got there quick because she was one of the people that said she'd used this before. So if you're still finding it, take a couple minutes. Vicky found it. And again, everybody doesn't need to go. You'll be able to see what we're doing just through watching. Maybe I'll give you 30 seconds more. And even after we've begun, you will still be able to participate when you found it. When you get there, you should see a box that said, "What is it?" And I see somebody wrote here, which is a great start, but hold the rest of your answers for the reading. But even that answer will fit. Okay. So again, this is adapted from The Heart of Our Faith by Monica Jacobson Tennyson. What is it that calls you here, that calls you onward, that calls you inward, that leads you homeward? And as you have thoughts, you can drop some words. What is it that gives you the power to make that change, to ask that question, to take that journey? What is it? What is it that says you have done well, that asks you to learn more, that brings you to stillness, that holds you up in hard times? What is it? So I see a lot of people are adding words. I'm going to give you a couple more minutes to reflect on that. While the magic happens. One of the things that's challenging for me with Zoom calls is the technology. I need somebody in the room with me. But Here we go. So this is the word cloud that you all have created. And wow, look at that big word right there in the middle. Love. As I was thinking about this activity, I wondered if love would end up one of the biggest words right there in the middle. I think that's so cool because it's what some of you have begun to learn with the Article 2 work, is that it centers around love. So this is something that if you want to have fun and keep adding to, you're welcome to do that. And we can look again later. And it would be great if somebody, when we share it again later, has the skills to screenshot it and share it with your congregation, because this is really representing who you are and why you're here. Okay, give me a moment. Most of the service won't be this fun. Okay, so now I got a question. How do I get out of the screen share?
Should be a red button that says stop share.
Aha.
You're not sharing right now.
Oh, good. Was I sharing?
You were, yeah.
Oh, good. Okay. It made it go away somehow. Wonderful. So I have learned a bit about your congregation from Horst and Ellen and Joan, and you should be proud of the anti-oppression work that you have done. Some of you have put in quite a bit of time reading, learning, and engaging together around anti-oppression and anti-racism. It feels good to be with people who are doing the work.
Hello?
The work is what is most important. It is hard, and we must engage at some level for the rest of our lives. But our children and grandchildren will be grateful for the time we've put in. If we look ahead, we can imagine a world where everyone is free and no one is oppressed. Without our imaginations, we'll never get there. Sometimes it seems discouraging, especially if you've been at this work for decades. However, changes have happened, big changes. And when we look at history, some things have changed nearly overnight. So let's expect the good while putting in the effort. Let's take a minute to close our eyes and imagine the future we are creating. Unitarian Universalism is a covenantal faith. The thing that ties us together in religious community is the practice of keeping covenant with each other and the world. Our covenant grows out of our values, which grow out of our inspirations, and all are in service of our purpose. It is because ours is a living covenantal faith that we must revisit the things that are most important to us, to be sure they are still the things that are most important to us. So let's begin with getting to a little familiar or a little more familiar with the eighth principle. And what would be awesome for me is if I could get a few volunteers to help me with my voice here to read these slides I'm going to share. And I'm just going to ask people to jump in if they feel comfortable as I flip to a new slide, and count on the leaders in this group to do that. We are all leaders in this group. Oh. I forget I can't put a full screen on while I'm still before I've shared the screen. So you get to see all my tabs. Okay, who'd like to read this first screen for us?
Why don't you just call people's names?
Oh, I'm a teacher and I never like to use that strategy, but since I've been invited, Joan, you can go first.
Sure. The 8th principle. We, the member congregations of the Unitarian Universalist Association, covenant to affirm and promote journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
And that was a long sentence, right? So Joan, I'm going to ask you to read that again, just starting with journeying.
Journeying towards spiritual wholeness by working to build a diverse, multicultural, beloved community by our actions that accountably dismantle racism and other oppressions in ourselves and our institutions.
Thank you. Where did this come from? Trista, will you take this next one?
Paula Cole-Jones, Director of Racial and Social Justice for the Mid-Atlantic District of the UUA, after working with congregations on these issues for over 15 years, realized that a person can believe they are being a good UU and following the 7 principles without thinking about or dealing with racism and other oppressions at the systemic level.
Thank you. And how about Miriam?
For people identified as white, it is too easy to ignore these issues, which is exactly what keeps the system of racism in our society alive, and in fact, worsening right now. We need to decenter whiteness and other dominant cultures in UUism.
Thank you. And how about Mary?
UUs and the UUA have done very good work in fighting racism, such as during the Civil Rights Movement and in the 1990s, passing a resolution in 1997 at GA after a precursor resolution in 1992 to become an anti-racist, anti-oppression, multicultural organization. But the funding and support started to wane in the 2000s. Our accountability mechanism failed us.
How about Craig?
Mute. Okay, so the 8th principle came from a feeling that we need something to renew our commitment to this work, to hold ourselves accountable, and to fulfill the potential of our existing principles.
Thank you. Susie.
In 2013, the first draft was adopted by the UU Church of Restoration in Philadelphia, and in 2017 was introduced to other ministers and suggested it be adopted by the UUA.
Thank you. And how about Bill?
Before the Article 2 revisions, the plan was to introduce it for an initial vote at GA 2023. In the meantime, over 200 congregations have adopted the 8th principle in their congregations.
Thank you. Oh, I like that, calling on people. That's a way to keep people on their toes and engaged. Thanks for that invitation, Joan. Okay, now I'll get back to where I need to be, which is here. One of the things that's often been said since the conversation around the eighth principle has kind of moved into the conversation, or even when the eighth principle conversation first started, is why do we need the eighth principle? Because so many things in our current 7 principles address some of the things in the eighth principles. But our existing 7 principles imply the eighth principle, but do not explicitly hold us accountable for addressing these oppressions directly, especially at the systemic level. UUism has great potential for building diverse, multicultural, beloved community, as envisioned by Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., not just European Americans and African Americans, but including Native Americans, Latinx people, and other cultural groups globally, and could experience tremendous diversification, vitality, and thriving if it works to embody this vision. But it won't happen without conscious awareness and effort on our part. Many people of color have been attracted by the values and potential of UUism, but their souls have been repeatedly wounded by its whiteness. Let's make our actions match our values. Dismantling racism, white supremacy, and other oppressions require work at the personal and institutional levels. Well, that's a bit about the eighth principle. Moving into Article 2. Until recently, maybe even today, many of you have probably not even heard of Article 2, although you have likely read, studied, spoke, or even embodied the UU7 principles. For many of us, this is the meat, or beans if you are a vegetarian, of our faith. Our principles, sources, and purposes are documented in Article 2 of the UUA's bylaws. This is the foundation for all of the work of our UUA and its member congregations and communities. It is the covenant to which all our congregations pledge themselves when they become members of the UUA. For many of us, it feels like our 7 principles and 6 sources have existed forever, when in fact, they were only adopted in 1985. In 1985, I was 14. Were any of you around for the conversations when the 7 principles became our Article 2, or the old principles were updated into the 7 principles? Anybody remember that? I was surprised to learn that I was 14, because when I think of the 7 principles before all of this recent learning, I've just always imagined that they were there since I was very young. So they certainly made an impact on my life. I don't remember when they happened, but I do remember in my teenage years a buzz around our congregation, particularly around women's rights and changing of the language in our hymnals, particularly those conversations. When Article 2 was revised, the principles and purposes came after many years of effort by UU women, particularly the UU Women's Federation, to push for gender equality in UUism, support for women in the ministry, and to eliminate sexist language from our hymns, bylaws, including the version of Article 2 that passed in 1961. At the time, the Unitarians and Universalists merged. So in 1961, when the Unitarians and Universalists merged, there were 6 principles that were our Article 2, and it wasn't until 1985 that they were revised into the 7 principles with new language. At the time, these changes were radical and brought fierce dissent, but more than that, they inspired excitement and possibility. They moved us into the times. A lot had happened between 1961 and 1985. Well, it has been a similar amount of time, and a lot has happened between 1985 and 2023. Our bylaws direct us to review our bylaws every 15 years. So here we are. In the mid-2010s, the ground began to shift again, much as it did in response to the women's movement. The emergence of the Black Lives Matter movement, the election of Donald Trump with his racist and misogynist campaign, and the urgent calls to confront white supremacy culture in our own movement. All of these compelled UUs to ask questions about whether our principles reflected fully who we are and who we need to be. By the 2017 General Assembly, there were multiple grassroots efforts to change our principles. The first was overwhelmingly adopted, to change prophetic women and men to prophetic people, to move beyond gender binary. There was also a proposal to change the first principle from the inherent worth and dignity of all people to the inherent worth and dignity of all beings. This proposal was ultimately tabled as delegates at that GA grappled with the reality that we still had a lot of work on living the first principle for people. Discussions of the eighth principle were also taking place, and by 2020, hundreds of UU congregations had adopted it. It was within this context that in 2020, your UUA board appointed an Article 2 study commission to integrate these conversations and lead a discernment process for our whole association about our core values, covenant, and purpose. The board gave the commission a broad change to review, change, or reimagine Article 2 to, quote, enable our UUA, our member congregations, and our covenant communities to be a relevant and powerful force for spiritual and moral growth, healing, and justice. We are currently in a multi-year process to consider changes to our UUA principles and purpose. Congregational resources for small group ministry and group discussion were developed and shared in the fall of 2021. Focus groups, individual interviews, and surveys continued through the winter and spring of 2022. Draft language was prepared and shared during general sessions at the 2022 General Assembly. Focus groups and surveys were used to collect feedback on these drafts. In the fall of 2022, the Article 2 Study Commission held feedback sessions and surveys on different drafts of Article 2, each draft informed by previous feedback sessions and surveys. At the end of this feedback cycle, the Article 2 Study Commission will submit its recommendation for a new Article 2, or they have now, just this January, to the Board of Trustees. Over the course of its work, the Commission engaged in 45 feedback sessions with 4,611 total participants. Their videos reached 7,765 viewers, and their 29 surveys generated a total of 10,925 responses. I wonder if any of you were involved in any of those feedback sessions with the UUA Article 2 Study Commission. Did you fill out any surveys online? Did you have a chance for your voice to be heard in those conversations? Did you even know those conversations were happening? Eleanor did, yes. Miriam's raising her hand. So I'm glad that you were able to participate a little bit. And even if you haven't, there are still opportunities to participate. After 2.5 years, the proposal went to the UUA board in January. So I wanted us to take just a brief moment to look together at the Article 2 study report. If you haven't had a chance to do it, it's pretty accessible online. I am at the end of this going to share a list of resources, and this is one of the resources that I share, so it will be easy for you to find. But just so you kind of know what we're looking at, what we're talking about visually, I wanted to scroll through this with you. So I'm just going to give you a piece of the, are you seeing my screen?
Yes.
Okay, awesome. So we've got this beautiful cover. It is a 26-page document. Just want to give you a taste of what it looks like. Are you seeing the Article 2 study report as a full screen or as a half screen?
half screen.
Okay. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Again, I appreciate the graciousness to my tech skills here. So it's giving a lot about the history, who was involved, who are the stakeholders, what happened at GA, the full process and timeline, the approach that the committee took. What I'm pulling down here to is a visual. Here it gives the full text of current Article 2. You'll see our 7 principles and our sources. And then it gives the proposed revision, all of the language for the new revision. But this is what I want us to look at. And I know some of you have seen this before and have had a chance to discuss. And here we are with, as I shared before, that love right there in the middle. And then these words around it are, instead of principles, value statements. So as you have a chance to look closer at this document, this is the piece that well, also as an artist and a visual learner, this is the piece that speaks most to me. But it breaks it down really nicely and then gives definitions, because we might define these words differently too. And so a part of what happened in all those conversations was to come up with clear definitions for these words that folks agreed with. So I hope you'll go back to this document and review it closely. And I hope you'll go to the 8th Principle website and review that closely. And another thing that Paula Cole-Jones encourages us to do is to go back and look at the resolutions that were determined at the past many General Assemblies to find out, what have we been talking about for a long time? And what you'll notice is how all of these things fit together. The work that we've been doing here as a congregation, the 8th Principle, and now Article 2, and even our 7 principles, how all of these things weave so beautifully together. Water break. So what's next? Throughout this spring, congregational delegates and the board can propose amendments to the proposal. Congregations are encouraged to have conversations to gather input from their members to inform their GA delegates. Amendments will be considered at the 2023 GA and require a majority vote to be accepted. If any of the delegate amendments are accepted, and if the proposal receives majority approval, then the Article 2 Study Commission will make any necessary changes to create a final draft for consideration at the 2024 General Assembly. The final proposal will require a 2/3 majority vote at the General Assembly in 2024 to be adopted. And so part of the reason why I read all those figures earlier of how many people were surveyed and is to just really impress that these decisions weren't made by a committee in a room, that it really has been intentional to include as many voices of all of the people in our denomination as possible. And if you're just learning about this and still want to get engaged, again, there are still opportunities to do that. Also wanting to point out that although Article 2 is being proposed at the General Assembly this year, if it's voted on, it won't become official until it receives 2 votes. It needs to be voted yes on 2 times in a row before it's moved forward. So it wouldn't be until General Assembly 2024 that it would be completely adopted. The final version of Article 2 is amended by the Board of Trustees and/or the 2023 General Assembly. I think I just told you about this part. So Susan Frederick Gray is our current Unitarian Universalist president. And I just wanted to say that I agree with her when she says that, I got a screen. Let me fix my screen. Okay, couldn't see you guys. She wrote an article in the UU World about all of this recently. And she ended with with this that I just completely agree with. May we enter our conversations with a spirit of curiosity, holding off attachment to outcomes, and listen with our whole hearts into the fullness and diversity of voices in our community. May the process itself deepen our understanding of and commitment to our faith. I think often we forget that the process itself is so important, that the work that we're doing is so important in the moment. So we've learned a lot. I've talked a lot, and I'd like to just take a moment to move and take a breath and breathe. And so I want to encourage each of you to begin by making your body small for whatever that means to you. Just make your body small. Hold that position for 2 full breaths. And slowly make your body big for whatever that means to you. Hold that position for 2 full breaths. And lastly, return to a comfortable position and breathe together for 2 full breaths. Well, as we were getting started this morning, I shared with some of you that I had a conversation with my minister just this week, and I shared that I was going to be doing the service about the 8th principle with your congregation today. And my minister said to me, "But Jen, there is no 8th principle anymore." And I said, "What?" Yes, there is an 8th principle. And certainly according to Paula Cole-Jones, there is still an 8th principle. And so me and my minister, Julie, have a lot of work to do and conversations to have as we move forward. But a lot of people are asking that question, is there any point now in adopting an 8th principle? As with Article 2, it appears as though the 7 principles are going away. Our congregations, ministers, and members have all kinds of feelings about both of these pieces and suggested changes. So this next piece of the service is more than information. It is my personal, as we called when I was growing up in the UU Church, a pulpit editorial of why I am still supporting and encouraging congregations to adopt the 8th principle, even though at this time the expected vote at GA has moved away from the 8th principle and instead is asking us to vote to accept the changes to Article 2. Because of this, many are thinking the 8th principle is a moot point. Many are also saying that Article 2 changes will replace the 7 principles. Although this is ultimately true on paper, the language will be different. There won't be a list of principles. However, Article 2 doesn't throw anything away. The values of the principles are still there. Everything you are doing now to live into the 7 principles, or 8 principles, you will be doing with Article 2 changes. It is the same work. And for me, that's the clearest point. It's about the work of anti-oppression and anti-racism, the work outside our doors, but especially inside our buildings, our worship, our board meetings, and our religious education programs. It is also important to remember that there is still over a year before Article 2 changes would be finalized and voted on. And then it will take some time to determine how those changes are reflected in our congregations. It's also possible Article 2 revisions won't pass. So we should keep moving forward. As Paula Cole-Jones says, however the vote turns out, we are stronger for doing the work. Paula Cole-Jones, the founder of the 8th Principle Project, who also serves on the Article 2 Study Commission, says we shouldn't stop just because we think something else is happening. When congregations adopt the 8th principle locally, they have the 8th principle. So whatever is happening around them, whatever is happening at the congregation close by, whatever is happening nationally, You will still have the 8th principle as a guide. The more congregations that do that, the more we ensure that UUism will be moving forward in terms of change. 8th principle was the catalyst for getting Article 2 revisions moving. Use it as a catalyst in your congregation. The 8th principle really reflects work we have been doing for years, but the 8th principle centralizes it. The 8th principle puts it at the center and says this should be a part of congregational life, not work that is just left to the Social Justice Committee. We are at a very early stage in institutionalizing the 8th principle. We are on a learning curve, a growth curve. So keep adopting the 8th principle and keep figuring it out what it means to live the 8th principle. And again, as Paula Jones says, it is not either or. If there ever is a time to think of both and, this is the time. I found this great church service that was given January 22nd at the UU Community Church of Southwest Michigan in Portage. The title of the service was Change as Spiritual Practice. It was, this message was delivered right after the Article 2 revision committee submitted their revisions to the board. And the speaker was Ebony Peace. I'm going to include this in the resources, and if you'd like to watch her whole video, it would be great. But I just made a few notes, and I just wanted to share these rough notes that I took when I listened to her service about change as spiritual practice. We are the living tradition, open to new information. We have a culture of learning. Change is good. Our universe is moving. We are moving. Our faith is moving. This is a ritual of change, a ritual of transformation. This is where we practice, celebrate the process. It is impossible to deepen without change. We are what we practice. When our principles transform, so do we. Change isn't easy, even when it's moving us in the right direction. I think we can all think a little bit about our own personal experience of times where we needed to make changes. And even though we knew we needed to make them and they were going to be good in the long run, they were hard. In 2006, when other revisions were suggested and then later voted down, the UUA moderator at the time, Jeannie Cordier, said, "I hope that congregations will participate and take this review seriously. This could be a good practice of renewal for us to talk about what it is we believe, a way to articulate our faith. I hope this becomes an extension of conversations that I come across everywhere, of people interested in talking about what they believe. This is what we're supposed to be doing, talking about who we are and what we believe. Let this be a time of renewal and recommitment, possibly a time for transformation." And I'll close with this beautiful reading that I found. As an anti-racist, I have been focusing myself hard on learning and relearning over the last 10 years or so, and yet I am still embarrassed by what I don't know or feel overwhelming guilt for the harm that I or my ancestors have caused. It is easy to get discouraged and fall back into these conditioned thoughts and do nothing but wallow in my own feelings. I appreciate the story about metamorphosis and how with the death of old ways of being, new ways of thinking can emerge. This is an excerpt from Leanne Vanderpool's book, A Shift in Being. Metamorphosis for a caterpillar is a process of death and emergence, not morphing. Wrapped in its cocoon, its body decays and disintegrates into a blob of premortal goo, a nutrient-rich stew of death cells, mixed with some bits and pieces of caterpillar's innards. Then one day, something remarkable happens. In the midst of the puddle of decaying ooze, a new cell pops up. Ping! These cells have been called imaginal cells because they are imagining what is possible. The immune system of the dying caterpillar, taking the imaginal cell to be some sort of enemy form, attacks it and kills it. But then another imaginal cell pops up. Ping! and the immune system again trounces it. Soon a number of imaginal cells pop up, ping, 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 and the immune system, although it's beginning to fail from the stress of death, continues to fight. In time, however, the imaginal cells pop up faster and in greater numbers than the fading immune system can kill them off. And then, because the imaginal cells are encoded with the program to create a butterfly, they start joining together to form cell clusters, clusters of wing cells, antenna cells, digestive tract cells, and others take form. The cell clusters eventually form together and the transformation is complete. The butterfly emerges as an altogether new entity. I love to visualize this metamorphosis in my own life as I transform from goo into a beautiful full being, but also to imagine the metamorphosis of our neighborhoods, congregations, organization, and our culture. We are the imaginal cells. We are imagining what is possible. And if we take on this work and do it well, cells will keep popping up, clusters will form, and an altogether new system will emerge from our imaginations. Thank you. And with that, I would like to invite any questions or thoughts. I'm curious about what excites you about the direction we are headed and what concerns you.
Jenny, do you want to do